I'm Hanson Hossein. Welcome to Media Space. Our show seeks the collision points between media and technology. We talk to creative thinkers on the hot-button issues of our digital age. Together, we'll find out how communication technology is changing our lives right now and what's next. In this episode, Brent Friedman made the big career move from Hollywood to Washington's Whidbey Island. It's a major shift from writing for mainstream network shows like Twilight Zone and Enterprise to made for online series for MTV and Sony. But Brent's new career is more than just about webisodes. He's pioneering transmedia storytelling, highly produced narratives told across TV, web, games, and mobile. Is Brent the future of storytelling? And is he pushing a new Hollywood business model right here in the Pacific Northwest? We'll also bring you into our conversation with Brent. Use the Twitter hashtag MediaSpace and we'll track your questions. Brent, welcome.
Thank you.
So how does transmedia storytelling work?
Well, it's not rocket science. It's simply a different form of storytelling in terms of the approach. Most storytelling, if you're talking about TV shows, movies, books, there's a linear progression. There's the classic 3-act structure. What transmedia does is it looks for kind of additional tributaries of narrative possibilities that exist within whatever storyverse you create. So it's a way of creating a more kind of 3-dimensional storytelling experience for the user. And I always like to think of it as kind of a digital sandbox. And the main storyline lays on top, and you can come in and anyone can come and play with the story, see what they want, watch a number of episodes. But if you want to dig a little deeper, there's underlying veins of storytelling that go as deep as you can really lay out as a creator. So it gives everyone a chance to experience the story in whatever way they want.
You did this most recently with Vilmont for MTV. Mm-hmm. Where was the main narrative there, and what other platforms were you using for this?
So the main narrative there was following the main character, a girl named Sophie, who was investigating the disappearance and possible murder of her older brother, who was last seen at a college called Vilmont. And her investigation was what I would call the A storyline. And you followed her through 35 episodes, trying to uncover the secrets first about her brother, and then about herself and her own family, and her investigation into this very, simple missing person case unraveled a whole new reality for her.
Let's play a little bit of that storyline, and then I'm going to ask you what platforms it played on primarily.
Okay.
Hey, so if you're watching this, I lost my phone. Do the right thing, man. Give it back. Or else, I'm gonna find your ass.
Problem was, I never could find Eric's ass. For 6 years. And then one day, he just showed up.
Should probably warn viewers this is a fairly graphic scene.
See, the front teeth have been knocked out, so identification from dental has proved problematic.
Okay, so Brent, this is how long was this particular episode? This is the first episode of Vilmont.
The first 12 were all 2 minutes and 25 seconds long.
And where did they play? And what platform are we talking about here?
Well, MTV had a really innovative idea. They wanted to create kind of transmedia content and experiences for their audience. And instead of just throwing stuff onto the web, they actually wanted to use their on-air channel to promote online. So what we did was we made a deal with them whereby they took the first 12 episodes of our show and aired them in the podcasts. The ad pods between the hills and the city. Their 2 most popular shows at the time Vilmont aired. So every 2 minutes and 25 seconds where there should have been an ad in between at the 15 and the 30 and the 45-minute blocks of an hour of programming, there was an episode of Vilmont brought to you by Verizon.
It's interesting because you're not used to hearing mainstream or legacy media driving web. It's usually web drives television. This is a weird equation, television driving web. What was the thought process there?
It was pretty simple, actually. They had done a lot of market research on their audience, and what they were finding is their core audience, their core demographic, was online while they were watching the channel. So, and not only that, they were probably texting their friends on mobile, sitting in front of a laptop, and then with the screen on in the background. So they wanted to try and create content that actually played on all three screens simultaneously, or at least gave the audience the opportunity to experience the show on all three screens simultaneously.
Now, you started out as a Hollywood scriptwriter, which is challenging enough in itself, but it sounds to me that it's much easier to write a script for Star Trek Enterprise than it is to think about multiple platforms and webisodes and television and everything else. How do you actually take your classic story structure and think about scripting this kind of thing?
If you had said any other show besides Star Trek, I would have said you're absolutely correct. That was a very hard show to write for because every story you can imagine had already been told.
Because you had the canon there. With
yes,
it, right.
Multiple series over multiple decades. But that aside, you're absolutely right. This is more akin to writing a video game, which I've done for a number of different projects. And in a television show, you're simply trying to come up with, sometimes an idea of a whole season arc at the beginning of launching a show, and then just following the character's natural progression. On this, as I said before, you're really trying to do that on a 3D level. So you still have the obligation to tell that main storyline, like you would a television show, but you're also trying to create different stratifications of narrative. And in the case of Vilmont, our objective was, let's give people 12 episodes to hook them into the show. And when you have 2 minutes and 25 seconds, you really have to rethink how you tell a story. The episodes were very much, instead of taking 12 minutes or 25 minutes of content and then just breaking it up arbitrarily, we really tried to craft each episode with a beginning, middle, and an end, and give that hook at the end of every episode. We like to think of it as potato chip content, where you have one episode and it's not enough. It gets a little taste in your mouth and you want another. So the idea was, with 12 episodes, we would build such a huge hook at the end of the 12th episode that you would want to then see the rest, which you could only see online. So the idea was, use on air to promote the show. By putting us in those ad pods for two very popular shows, we were getting exposed to 3-4 million people for each of our episodes. And we ended up having a pretty good retention rate through the first, I think, 10 episodes that went online. We had over a 90% retention rate. So it was very successful in getting people's attention, going, what was that little thing I just saw? I want to know more about it, driving them online, where then they would watch the whole show play out. So it was a question of, how do we design the story so that if someone just wants to watch the episodes, the 35 episodes, it all makes sense. There's nothing more that they need to know. But if they want to know more, they can go online and see a whole series of prequel episodes that are told from a different character's point of view. On mobile, there was additional content that was not in any of the actual main episodes. And then we were also previewing the episodes on mobile. Part of our experience was, we're going to tell the story of this girl weaving her way through this investigation that happens to take place at Vilmont University. But we created an entire website called Vilmont U, which, from a fictional standpoint, we presented as a real college website. And we filled it with all sorts of content that was constantly getting repopulated, blog posts and things from different professors, and we ended up playing out different storylines on the internet. So it was a chance for people to be watching the show, hear a reference to something in one of the episodes, and actually go on to Vilmont University and follow that, that trail of narrative a little bit further, which then might take them back to Twitter, where they could then talk to some of the actual characters in the show.
So you are engaging your audiences in a much different way as well. Is it a participatory thing though? Do they have any impact on the outcome of the show?
They don't have, in that case, they did not have an impact on the outcome of the show. What they were able to do was they were able to, we created alternate episode or alternate endings. And our idea was, you can choose which way you want the show to end by which side of the story fence that you get on. The show ultimately had you're either for Vilmont, the university, or you're against it. There was a little revolution kind of plot woven into it. And at some point, you're asked as a student to choose, to take sides. And depending on which side you take, that's the end. That's the final episode you get.
Oh, well, so they're very much. I mean, I actually sat down and watched all 35 episodes in a row, and I was actually hooked. But it felt like I was watching a bit of a video game. You're getting the clues from the cell phone that comes up and tells you what's going on and sets the premise for that particular episode. Is it a different production style as well? I'm even looking at, say, Vilmont compared to one of your first transmedia storytelling series, which was Afterworld, which had a much more of a video game feel to it as well. This is the Afterworld artwork. In fact, I think we have a little bit of video from Afterworld as well. That very much felt like a video game. It was stop motion type graphics compared to something which is very much a real television feel, which is Vilmont. What was your thought process, or what is the thought process going into actual production in this kind of storytelling?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Afterworld was the first show that we did at Electric Farm, and Vilmont was the most recent show, and we did 2 shows in between. And with Afterworld, there really wasn't an online media business at that time. There was a lot of videos on YouTube, and there was a lot of, kind of independent content. But nothing quite as ambitious as what we did on Afterworld was.
This guy's walking to Seattle, apparently, at the end of the world, right?
Yes, from New York.
From New York.
Yeah.
So it's got a nice Seattle hook to it.
Well, and that's actually the key is that that's a pretty epic story when you think about it. And to try and do that on a web video budget, where you're going to follow some guy walking live action from New York across kind of a post-apocalyptic environment all the way to Seattle, you couldn't do it. It would be impossible. But I didn't want to sacrifice the scope of the story, for the medium. So a friend of mine and I, a guy named Michael DeCourcy, who's a local Seattle kind of computer animator, graphic artist, came up with this idea of doing it in a very kind of photoreal, kind of almost what I called American anime style animation.
Let's actually watch a few seconds of this. We'll put the audio up as well so we can get a sense of what this is all about.
Elevators weren't the only thing missing that first morning. It made no sense. A big 4-star hotel and not a soul in sight. I thought I was dreaming. That was the only rational explanation. I'll never forget walking out onto 5th Avenue, middle of Manhattan, and all I could hear were birds.
Hello?
I mean, I love the feel of this. I know this is a few years ago, but I mean, I love the apocalyptic premise anyway, but the art, even though you might think it's a little bit more sort of primitive compared to, say, Vilmont, there's a wonderful, I actually wanted to see all the episodes, but they're not available right now. Apparently this is being so successful, you're going to do something else with it soon, right?
Yes, it's going to be coming out onto DVD soon. It's been, it's an interesting business model, which I can get to in a second. The thing I wanted to make a point here about Afterworld was that we thought we would tell this huge story and that we would save a bunch of money by animating it. And our technique was, we said, to get a real quality to the animation, let's go out and take high-def photos. Let's have someone drive across the country, and all the locations we want to use, we'll take high-def photos. And the great thing about high-def is everything's in equal focus. So even that one moment you get there, you see a lot of depth in it. And we borrowed a lot of anime techniques where we simply move the camera around a very dense shot rather than having multiple shots. And by doing that and putting a 3D character in a 2D space, you create 2.5D.
Oh.
And that was kind of what we call American anime.
Well, you referred to business model. It's interesting to me. I mean, we already know that online anything doesn't quite get the same kind of advertising revenues as television. So you've had to think of a completely new business model here. Now with Vilmont, and I think with all these other series that you have, there seems to be some kind of product placement going on. With Vilmont, you had the Verizon phone. How does that work for you as a model?
Well, how it arose was when we created Afterworld, we stumbled on, but through blind luck, a business model, which was the show that we created was so ambitious, it cost us $3 million to make.
Wow.
130 episodes in that style of animation on paper seemed like, oh, how hard is it going to be? There's not that much animation. But we put a lot of care into it, and we cast a lot of Hollywood talent to do the voices and the music, and just the production on 130 of anything takes a long time. And we created a whole studio, and what we quickly found was, well, how are we going to make our money back? Well, by creating that much content and by creating a very immersive website, which unfortunately has been shut down, we created what we found out was premium content. And this was back in 2006, and there was a real burgeoning market internationally for premium online content, and especially content that could be sold on mobile as well. The rest of the world in many ways is so far ahead of us in terms of consuming original online and mobile content that we found a partner in Sony Pictures International Television, which was importantly one of the only large studios that wasn't affiliated with an actual physical network. So they wanted to create a digital network, and this project became their proof of concept.
That's great. Well, that's an interesting business model. You know what? Let's break for just a minute, and when we return, who needs Hollywood? Here's Washington Filmworks director Amy Lillard on multi-platform storytelling in this region.
Hi, my name is Amy Lillard. I'm the Executive Director of Washington Filmworks. Washington Filmworks is the private nonprofit organization that manages the state film program and the state production incentive program. We're seeing a lot of news come out of Hollywood, a lot of really big studio executives and studios and high-profile actors really delve into and get interested in this concept of multi-platform storytelling. You know, we see it really as the marriage between content creators, people like screenwriters and directors and producers even, marrying with technology resources. The interesting thing is that as you look at the different states across the country who are starting incentives for multimedia, they are all states that are looking to build technology resources and technology industry within the state. What's amazing about Washington specifically is the fact that the technology industry already exists. We're already 2 steps ahead of some of these other jurisdictions that are trying to create the technology first. Here, not only do we have the creative capital with amazing directors such as Lynn Shelton, who did Hump Day, or David Russo, who did The Immaculate Conception of Little Dizzle, all of this really creative capital, as we call it. But we also have technology resources. Of course, everyone knows we're the home of Microsoft and Amazon, but we also have this amazing subculture as well.
A bit more about the business model. I was looking at the view count on Vilmont when I was watching. At least online, it varied a bit. Is there a sustained viewership for this kind of storytelling?
Yeah, the interesting thing about the Vilmont view count is that MTV built kind of an imperfect player and device. But what those view counts actually represent is people that were new to register to MTV.com. So it wasn't actually registering true view counts. It was only registering anyone who had just signed on to MTV.com.
So what was the view count ultimately for Vilmont? If you combine television and online and
again,
web,
you're into 30, 40, 50 million views. Wow. The bottom line was, and this is the most telling number. What happened was we had our deal with Verizon, who has their own kind of mobile video channel called through Vcast. We were streaming episodes to Vcast exclusively. By the end of the run on Vilmont, we had streamed almost 3 times as many episodes as they had for the MTV Music Video Awards.
Wow. So success for MTV then?
So huge success for MTV, huge success for Verizon. And part of the real lure for a company like Verizon, when we went to them and pitched them this project, was the transmedia model. And that model said, we're not just going to have you say, Verizon presents a little thing on television, which is great. We're going to carry the Verizon brand onto the internet. So anytime someone's watching something online, it will be there. And we're going to have it play on mobile. And you're going to have your exclusive episodes on mobile. And most importantly, we're going to weave it into the fiction. That's what they paid for. They paid millions of dollars to be to be both an enabler of the entire content experience and to be something that is seen and associated with what was considered a cool piece of programming.
They must have absolutely loved that.
It was great, and we saw test results that said before people watched the show, what was their impression of Verizon? And after they watched the show, what was their impression of Verizon? And almost uniformly, it went up over 10%.
So you left Hollywood for here.
Yes.
Washington Filmworks says they've got everything any transmedia storyteller could possibly want right here, right now. What do you think?
I think that's probably true. I think that this is a really unique area because of the tech infrastructure and the abundance of technology-related companies here, as well as there's a lot of creative talent here. And I think, you know, a lot of there's definitely some Hollywood expatriates that live here, but more importantly, you have a very vibrant game industry, which as games become more like, you know, interactive movies, you're getting a lot more kind of very narrative-minded game designers. You're bringing in a lot of writers to come in and you know, flesh out the game content. And you have close access to Vancouver, which has a huge, you know, film and television industry. So I think this area really could be the next epicenter of whatever I would consider to be the next wave of storytelling.
Speaking of epicenters, in Cambridge or Boston, MIT Media Lab is considered to be one of the centers for marrying technology and content creation. And they got these fabulous looking buildings out there near Harvard. You've been out to MIT Media Lab and you've sort of seen the future and where the technology is going. We're developing a lot of that here. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you'd like to see emulated here in this region that they're doing already on the East Coast, or just something different that we can do here?
Well, I think, you know, I went back to MIT last year to speak at their MIT Media Lab on the future of storytelling. And it was a great collection of people that were, you know, both from the Boston area, but then also internationally. I mean, that was the key, was they brought a lot of people into the MIT Media Lab and introduced them, made some really interesting connections, and some of those connections are actually now, you know, leading to future projects for me, and I know for other people as well. But the key to that whole experience was, yeah, they had great speakers and I met some good people, but they opened up the Media Lab and they let us go down and they let us see some of the really cool technology innovations that were being done there. And I have to tell you that, you know, as a writer, there's times when you get inspiration, you know, you just get one idea or something. The 3 hours that we were allowed to kind of walk through and get some live demonstrations of some stuff that was coming down the pipeline in terms of tech innovations, I could not stop getting ideas. I got probably 2 or 3 dozen
storytelling ideas from the technology that's being developed.
Things that I would go, wow, if you can do that, or if that's even remotely possible, then I can start thinking about telling a story this way. Or I can start telling a story about this technology and bring it back and think about it from a transmedia standpoint in this way. I think there's a huge opportunity to start bringing, you know, people from the tech sector together with the creative community. And when I say the creative community, in games as well. You know, games, I see games as something that's going to start merging more with television content. You know, you're going to start getting out of the realm where you just buy a disc and you go home and play a game. It's going to be more downloadable levels or episodes, almost like serialized content that happens to be interactive and that may have traditional content attached to it. And I've always kind of seen, and that was the original vision with Afterworld, was create a hybrid between serialized TV storytelling and video games. And, you know, my personal belief is that the epicenter, the true epicenter in terms of the platform of the future, is the Xbox Live.
And you got Kinect as well, and Windows 7 phone that's got Xbox Live on the phone, so you've got that whole experience. That actually begs a question that's come up on Twitter as well. Transmedia storytelling relies on multiple platforms, but do too many devices complicate creating an accessible experience? Are we getting, I mean, kids especially, are we getting inundated by all these distracting platforms, and are we not focusing properly on the storytelling experience?
I mean, I think that is certainly a danger. I think, you know, you start to expose yourself possibly to the Amadeus problem of too many notes. You know, it's just there is a point at which, you know, too much is just too much, and I think that the key is, and again with Vilmont, what we found is if that main storyline, if the main way in is very accessible to the point where it's either on television or it's just something you can go to a website and watch 35 episodes in a row and have a great experience. If that is solid, then everything else you do to it is just an enhancement.
And so it really comes down to the timelessness of storytelling. Despite all these gadgets and all this great new technology, the story's got to be good.
Yes, and you know, what I've found is that the things that lend themselves best to transmedia are things that have a deep story verse to it, things that invite you in, that draw you into something deeper. You know, with Vilmont, it was a college that we built an entire mythology around. And we said, okay, here's a school that's been around for 300 years, and all of these things have happened, and we're going to hint at all of these little things, not in the main storyline, but if you want to know more about Vilmont. We then allowed people to adopt, you know, or become one of the a member of one of the 5 houses, and we created our own mythology of each of these 5 houses, and it allowed the audience a way into our world, creating an identity for themselves, so that they became a character in the world.
Well, that's what I loved about Vilmont. That was that the story itself was very economical. You were very tight.
Yes.
You didn't give away too many details. You expected them to do a little bit more work, but it was enough.
My thoughts on storytelling at this day and age is you have to look at, again, video games, and really good video games don't have a traditional first act. They have essentially a tutorial, or they have a quick cutscene of 1 or 2 minutes, and then you're in the second act. Then you're into problems, and the rest of the narrative, what would be considered the traditional setup, is told along the way. So if you watch an episode of Afterworld, if you watch an episode of Vilmont, the entire first act setup is in 2 minutes. And then that allows people to get hooked. If they want to know more, if they want to pause and go explore and get a little bit more backstory, it's out there for them if they want to go find it.
Well, we've actually reached the end of this particular show, but actually for our live viewers, this show is not over. Join us at livestream.com/MCDM for a 4-peak salon with Brent and others on issues of ownership and net neutrality from the storyteller's point of view. So thank you all for joining us today. Tune in again next month online and on air for our next episode of Media Space. I'm Hanson Hossein.